The hospital machines beeped methodically in 8-year-old Ellie Morgan's room, their green and blue lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Outside her window, darkness pressed against the glass, amplifying the isolation of Memorial Children's Hospital's palliative care wing. "Mom," Ellie whispered, her voice thin as tissue paper, "I can't sleep again." Her fragile fingers clutched the small toy airplane she hadn't let go of since her diagnosis 4 months ago. Sarah Morgan stroked her daughter's forehead, feeling the heat of the fever that never quite broke. "I know, sweetheart. Do you want me to read another story?" Ellie shook her head weakly, her once vibrant curls now sparse against the pillow. "The airplanes, Mom. I wish I could hear them. Remember how they used to fly over our house? The sound always helped me sleep." Sarah fought back tears. Their old home was beneath a flight path, where planes would pass overhead every evening, a sound that had become Ellie's lullaby since infancy. But the hospital was miles from any airport, and the silence of night was broken only by the mechanical symphony of life-sustaining equipment. "I'll try something," Sarah whispered, stepping into the hallway to make a desperate phone call, never imagining that within 48 hours, 4,000 pilots across the country would answer a dying child's final wish in a way that would change everything. If stories of extraordinary compassion touch your heart, subscribe now to witness how humanity can rise to its most beautiful heights, even in our darkest moments. Chapter 1. The Final Flight Path Doctor. James Chen had been treating children with terminal illnesses for 17 years, but Ellie Morgan's case still kept him awake at night. The rare form of neuroblastoma had spread aggressively, defying every protocol and experimental treatment they'd tried. When he entered her room for morning rounds, the exhaustion on Sarah Morgan's face told him everything he needed to know. "Another rough night?" he asked quietly, checking Ellie's vitals while the child slept fitfully, finally having succumbed to exhaustion around dawn. Sarah nodded, rubbing her eyes. "She can't sleep when the pain spikes, Dr. Chen, and when she does sleep, nightmares wake her. She keeps asking for the sound of airplanes." Dr. Chen frowned slightly. "Airplanes." "Our old house was under a flight path," explained David Morgan, Ellie's father, who had just arrived with coffee for his wife. His eyes were hollow with grief and fatigue. The sound of evening flights passing overhead. It was her bedtime lullaby since she was a baby. "She says the silence here is too loud." Dr. Chen made a note in Ellie's chart. "Sleep is critical for her comfort now. Have you tried sound machines? We have several with various white noise options." "We've tried everything," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "Sound machines, recordings of airplane noise, even an app that tracks flights. Nothing works. She says it's not the same. She can tell it's not real." David placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. "She's always been fascinated by flight, wanted to be a pilot since she was 4. Could identify more aircraft by their engine sounds than most adults can by sight." Dr. Chen looked at the small collection of model airplanes arranged on Ellie's bedside table, gifts from family, hospital staff, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which had arranged a cockpit visit before Ellie became too ill for outings. The worn toy airplane, clutched in her small hand even as she slept, spoke to her enduring passion. "I wish there was more we could do," Dr. Chen said, genuine regret in his voice. "The care team is focusing entirely on her comfort now, but sleep is a crucial part of that." As Dr. Chen left, David pulled Sarah into a tight embrace. "We'll figure something out," he whispered into her hair. "We always do." If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. In the hospital cafeteria later that morning, Michael Reeves stirred his coffee absently, his pilot's uniform slightly rumpled after a red-eye flight from Chicago to Minneapolis. As a captain for Northern Airways, he was used to grabbing meals in hospital cafeterias during layovers. They were often quieter than airport restaurants, and the coffee was usually better. His attention was caught by a conversation at the next table where a nurse was speaking to a younger colleague. The Morgan girl had another terrible night, the older nurse said. Sarah said she's asking for the sound of airplanes to help her sleep. Apparently that's the only thing that ever worked. That poor family, the younger nurse replied. How much longer does Dr. Chen think she has? Days, maybe a week. The hospice team is on standby. Michael found himself unable to look away from the nurse's table. As a father himself, stories of sick children always hit him hard, but this particular detail, a child finding comfort in the sound of aircraft, struck a deeper chord. Before he could second-guess himself, Michael approached the nurse's table. "Excuse me," he said. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm a pilot with Northern Airways. This child who finds airplanes sounds comforting. Is she a patient here?" The older nurse nodded cautiously. "Yes, in the palliative care wing. Ellie Morgan. She's 8. Would it be inappropriate if I visited? I have my captain's hat and wings with me. Maybe meeting a real pilot might brighten her day." Michael surprised himself with the offer, but something about this child's story compelled him to reach out. The nurses exchanged glances. "That's very kind," the older nurse, whose badge read Patricia, said finally. "I'm actually heading back up there now. I can check with her parents if you'd like to follow me." 20 minutes later, Michael stood in the doorway of room 417, watching as Patricia spoke quietly to Ellie's parents. The small girl on the bed was asleep, but restlessly so, her face occasionally twitching with discomfort. Sarah Morgan approached him, exhaustion evident in every line of her body, but gratitude in her eyes. "You're really a pilot? You'd take time to visit Ellie?" Michael nodded, removing his captain's hat respectfully. "Michael Reeves, Northern Airways. I have a daughter about Ellie's age. I heard she likes planes." "Loves them," David corrected, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "It's all she's ever cared about." "I have a 3-hour layover," Michael said. "I'd be honored to spend it here, if that would cheer her up at all." As if sensing their conversation, Ellie stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mum," she called weakly. "I'm here, sweetheart," Sarah answered, returning to her daughter's bedside. "There's someone special here to meet you, a real airplane captain." Ellie's eyes, dulled by medication and illness, suddenly widened as she spotted Michael in his uniform. "Are you really a pilot?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Captain Michael Reeves," he confirmed, stepping forward and giving her a playful salute. "Northern Airways, Boeing 737 fleet." "The 737-800 or 737 MAX?" Ellie immediately asked, struggling to sit up slightly. Michael blinked in surprise, then grinned. "Both, actually. I'm qualified on the entire 737 family. You know your aircraft." For the next hour, Michael sat with Ellie, answering her surprisingly technical questions about lift, engine thrust, weather patterns, and navigation systems. Despite her frail condition, her mind was sharp and her knowledge impressive. He showed her pictures from his flights on his phone, explained how different cloud formations affected turbulence, and even let her try on his captain's hat. As their time together drew to a close, Ellie's energy began to fade, her questions coming more slowly as fatigue overtook her. "Captain Michael," she said finally, her eyes growing heavy, "is it true that pilots can hear each other's radio calls if they're on the same frequency, even if they're in different planes?" "That's absolutely right," Michael confirmed. "We share information about weather, turbulence, routes, all kinds of things. It's like a community in the sky." Ellie smiled faintly. That must be nice, to not be alone up there. The simple observation struck Michael profoundly. "It is, Ellie. And you know what? Pilots look out for each other. It's an unwritten rule." As he prepared to leave, promising to bring her a real pilot's logbook on his next layover in Minneapolis, Sarah walked him to the elevator. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's the most animated I've seen her in weeks. But," she hesitated, "it's the nights that are hardest. She misses the sound of planes flying overhead. It's the only thing that ever helped her sleep soundly." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "The flight path. You lived near the airport. about 10 miles east under the approach for runway 30R. Flights would come in every few minutes during the evening push. The sound became her lullaby. Sarah wiped away a tear. Such a small thing, but it meant everything to her. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? On the flight back to Chicago that afternoon, Michael couldn't get Ellie Morgan out of his mind. Her knowledge of aviation, her passion for flight despite her condition, and her simple observation about pilots not being alone in the sky haunted him. As his co-pilot, First Officer Leila Rodriguez handled the takeoff procedures, Michael found himself thinking about the comfort Ellie had found in aircraft noise, how something most people considered a nuisance had been this child's lullaby. "You're quiet today, Captain," Leila observed once they reached cruising altitude. "Everything okay?" Michael shared Ellie's story, describing the 8-year-old aviation enthusiast facing her final days without the comfort that had once helped her sleep. "God, that's heartbreaking," Leila said. "Neuroblastoma. My nephew had that. He was one of the lucky ones who responded to treatment. Not all families get that miracle." What strikes me is how such a simple thing, aircraft noise, could make such a difference for her comfort. The hospital is miles from any flight path. "There's nothing we can do about that." Leila was quiet for a moment, her hands steady on the controls. "Maybe there is," she said finally. "What do you mean?" "What if we could adjust our flight path? Just slightly. Not enough to disrupt operations, but enough to bring us closer to the hospital." Michael shook his head reluctantly. ATC would never approve a deviation without operational necessity. Safety regulations. But what if it wasn't just us? Leila persisted. What if multiple flights requested the same minor adjustment? What if it became a temporary published approach variation? The idea seemed impossible, yet Michael couldn't dismiss it entirely. That would require approval from the FAA, the Airport Authority, ATC coordination. It's a massive undertaking. "For one little girl who wants to be a pilot," Leila said quietly, "who finds comfort in the sound of flight." When they landed in Chicago, instead of heading home for his 48-hour break, Michael went straight to the pilot's lounge at O'Hare. There he found Captain Douglas Wright, Northern Airways chief pilot and his former instructor, reviewing weather patterns for the next day's operations. "Doug, I need your advice," Michael said, sliding into the chair across from him. "It's about a special request. Probably impossible, but I had to try." Doug listened without interruption as Michael explained Ellie's situation and the idea that had formed during his flight with Leila. When he finished, Michael expected dismissal, a sympathetic but firm explanation of why such a request couldn't possibly be accommodated. Instead, Doug closed his laptop and leaned forward. "My brother's daughter died of leukemia when she was 9, he said quietly. "In her final weeks, all she wanted was to hear the ocean. We lived in Nebraska." Michael was silent, waiting. "I filled her room with recordings, sound machines, videos of waves breaking on shore. Nothing worked. She knew it wasn't real." Doug's eyes reflected old pain. "I would have given anything for a way to bring the real ocean to her. So you think it's worth trying, even though it's probably impossible?" Doug pulled out his phone. "Let me make some calls. We start with our Director of Operations, then work outward, the FAA Regional Office, Minneapolis ATC, Airport Authority. We'll need medical verification that this is a palliative care situation." "You really think this could happen?" "Probably not," Doug admitted. "But if we don't try, it's definitely not happening." Over the next 24 hours, Michael watched in astonishment as Doug activated a network of aviation professionals across multiple organizations. The request, officially termed a Compassionate Flight Path Adjustment, or CFPA, began working its way through channels that normally took months to navigate. The medical director at Memorial Children's Hospital provided the necessary documentation confirming Ellie's terminal status and the palliative care focus of her treatment. Minneapolis Air Traffic Control conducted preliminary feasibility studies for a minor approach adjustment that would bring aircraft within audible range of the hospital without compromising safety. What Michael hadn't anticipated was how the story would resonate among the pilot community. As details spread through crew lounges and operations offices, pilots from every major airline began reaching out, asking how they could support the effort. "It's gaining momentum," Doug informed him the next morning. "The FAA regional director is expediting review, and ATC is drafting a temporary approach procedure, but we still need final approval from Minneapolis Airport Authority and coordination with all airlines operating in the affected window. How long will that take?" Doug's expression was guarded. "Best case, 3 to 5 days. Worst case, it never happens." Michael thought of Ellie, of Dr. Chen's assessment that she might have only days remaining. She might not have that long. "I know. We're doing everything possible to accelerate the process." That afternoon, Michael's phone rang with a call from Sarah Morgan. "Captain Michael." Her voice was strained. "Ellie's asking for you. She had a very bad night, and the doctors, they're saying her condition is deteriorating faster than expected. She keeps talking about airplanes and asking when you'll come back." Michael closed his eyes, feeling a wave of emotion he hadn't anticipated. "I'll be on the next flight to Minneapolis," he promised. Before boarding, he called Doug with the update. "It's happening faster than they thought. We might be out of time." "Get there," Doug said firmly. "Be with her. I'll handle things on this end." If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you're listening to in the comments. When Michael arrived at Memorial Children's Hospital that evening, the atmosphere in Ellie's room had changed palpably. The medical equipment seemed to have multiplied, and the hospice nurse now sat quietly in the corner, monitoring Ellie's comfort levels. Both Sarah and David looked as though they hadn't slept in days. Ellie herself was noticeably weaker, her breathing more labored, but her eyes brightened when she saw Michael in his uniform. "Captain Michael," she whispered, "you came back." "I promised I would," he said, taking a seat beside her bed. "And pilots always keep their promises. Did you bring the logbook?" Michael produced a pilot's logbook. Not a new one as he'd initially planned, but his own first logbook, filled with entries from his early days of flight training. "I thought you might like this better. It's the actual logbook I used when I was learning to fly." Ellie traced the cover with reverent fingers. "Really? Your actual logbook?" "Every flight, every landing, every lesson is recorded in there," Michael confirmed. "I thought maybe you could be its keeper now." Tears filled Ellie's eyes. "But pilots need their logbooks. I have new ones for my current flights. This one records where I started, and I'd like it to be with someone who understands how special those first flights are." For the next hour, Michael went through the logbook with Ellie, explaining the entries, the instructor's notes, the airports he'd visited as a student pilot. Despite her weakened state, she asked insightful questions and listened with rapt attention. As evening deepened outside the window, Ellie's energy began to fade again. "I wish I could hear the planes," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Just one more time before I—" "Don't talk like that," Sarah interjected quickly, but Ellie shook her head. "It's okay, Mom. I know I'm going to fly away soon." She turned back to Michael. "In the sky, do planes ever fly together, like in formation?" Michael nodded. "Sometimes. Military aircraft do it all the time. Commercial flights stay separated for safety, but we're often aware of each other, especially approaching busy airports." "So you're never really alone up there," Ellie mused, returning to the thought that had struck her during their first meeting. "Never," Michael confirmed. "There's always someone on the same frequency, someone looking out for you." As Ellie's eyes grew heavy, Michael excused himself to step into the hallway, where he checked his phone. There were 17 missed calls from Doug and dozens of messages from pilots across the country. He called Doug immediately. "We've got preliminary approval," Doug announced without preamble. "The FAA has authorized a temporary flight path adjustment for compassionate grounds. Minneapolis Airport Authority signed off 10 minutes ago." Michael felt his breath catch. Are you serious? How is that possible? Let's just say when 4,000 pilots make the same request, people listen. Every major airline, plus cargo carriers, plus regional airlines, they all volunteered to adjust approaches to runway 30R for the next 72 hours. ATC has issued the temporary procedure. Flights can begin the adjusted approach pattern tomorrow evening. 4,000 pilots, Michael repeated incredulously. It's gone viral in the aviation community. Everyone wants to help. The first adjusted flight is scheduled for 1900 hours tomorrow, Northern Airways 527, operated by yours truly. I've swapped assignments to be there. Michael looked back through the doorway at Ellie, now sleeping fitfully, while her mother stroked her hair. Doug, the doctors don't think she has much time left. Maybe not even until tomorrow evening. There was silence on the other end then. What if we don't wait for tomorrow? What if we start tonight? How? The official authorization doesn't begin until— Not official flights, Doug interrupted. Private aircraft, general aviation. I've been fielding calls from private pilots all day, asking how they can help. What if we coordinate a series of flyovers starting tonight? Small aircraft operating under visual flight rules don't need the same level of authorization for routing adjustments. The idea seemed both brilliant and impossible. How would you coordinate that many private pilots on such short notice? The same way we got 4,000 commercial pilots on board in less than 48 hours. The aviation community looking out for one of their own. Because that's what Ellie is, Michael. She's one of us, a pilot who never got her wings. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? Michael returned to Ellie's room with renewed purpose. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, could I speak with you in the hallway for a moment? Once outside, he explained what had been set in motion, the official temporary flight path adjustment beginning tomorrow evening, and the possibility of private aircraft flyovers starting potentially within hours. You've done all this for Ellie? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. Why? You barely know us. Michael thought of his own daughter, safe at home in Chicago, of Doug's niece, who had wanted to hear the ocean from Nebraska, of the inexplicable connection he'd felt to Ellie from the moment he'd overheard the nurses discussing her case. Because Ellie loves flight, he said simply, and in aviation, we look out for our own. David placed a steadying hand on his wife's shoulder. Will she be able to hear them from her room? We're on the 4th floor, but the windows are sealed. That's something we need to figure out, Michael admitted. Ideally, we'd move her to a location with better acoustics, an upper floor, with windows that can open. Sarah shook her head. She's too fragile to move now. The medical team wouldn't approve it. As if summoned by their discussion, Dr. Chen approached, his expression curious. Captain Reeves, the nurses told me you've returned. Is everything all right? Michael quickly explained the flight path adjustment and the potential for private aircraft flyovers beginning that night. To his surprise, Dr. Chen didn't immediately dismiss the idea as medically inadvisable. Sleep deprivation is compounding Ellie's suffering, he said thoughtfully. If there's a legitimate chance that aircraft noise would help her sleep more peacefully in her final days, it's worth exploring accommodations. But she can't be moved, Sarah reiterated. Not to another facility, no, Dr. Chen agreed. But what about the rooftop helipad? It's used for emergency medical transports, but there are no scheduled arrivals tonight. We could set up a comfortable space with proper monitoring equipment. She would hear the aircraft clearly from there. The suggestion was unexpected, but perfect. The helipad would provide unobstructed sound access while allowing Ellie to remain under proper medical supervision. Would that be safe for her? David asked anxiously. We would create a sheltered area with all necessary medical support, Dr. Chen assured them. Her comfort is our priority now. If this might provide meaningful comfort, we should try. While Dr. Chen coordinated with the medical team to prepare the helipad, Michael stepped outside to call Doug with an update. We've got a location, the hospital helipad. How soon could the first aircraft be overhead? Let me work the radios, Doug replied. I've got 20 private pilots standing by at nearby airfields. We can have the first flyover within 90 minutes, with more following at 15-minute intervals. I'm boarding my commercial flight to Minneapolis now. I'll coordinate from the air and join you as soon as we land. The next hour was a flurry of activity as the hospital staff transformed a section of the helipad into a comfortable space for Ellie. A hospital bed with monitoring equipment was secured in place, with portable heating units creating a warm bubble against the evening chill. Screens provided privacy while allowing an unobstructed view of the sky, and the hospital chaplain brought stars and moonlighting that cast a gentle glow over the space. When everything was ready, Sarah and David accompanied Ellie as she was carefully transferred to the rooftop. Though heavily medicated for pain, she was conscious enough to be curious about the unusual relocation. "Where are we going?" she asked weakly. "Somewhere special," Sarah told her. "A surprise." As they emerged onto the rooftop, Ellie's eyes widened at the vast expanse of darkening sky above them. "We're outside," she whispered. "The helipad," David confirmed, helping adjust her blankets as the medical team settled her into the prepared space. "Captain Michael has a surprise for you." Michael stepped forward, now changed from his uniform into casual clothes. "Ellie, remember how you told me you missed hearing airplanes at night? How they helped you sleep?" She nodded slightly, her eyes gaining focus as she looked up at him. "Well, I talked to some pilot friends of mine, and they wanted to do something special for you." As if on cue, the distinctive sound of aircraft engines became audible in the distance, growing steadily louder as a small Cessna 172 approached, deliberately lower than usual, though still at a safe altitude. The pilot had coordinated with ATC to follow a flight path directly over the hospital. Ellie's face transformed as she recognized the sound. "An airplane!" she exclaimed, with more energy than she had shown in days. "Mom, Dad, listen, it's coming right over us." The aircraft passed overhead, its navigation lights blinking against the darkening sky, the sound of its engine washing over them like a wave. Ellie's face reflected pure joy as she tracked its path with her eyes until it disappeared into the distance. "There's more coming," Michael told her. "Many more." If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. Within minutes, another aircraft appeared. This time, a Piper Cherokee, its distinctive engine note slightly different from the Cessnas. It followed the same path, passing directly over the hospital helipad where Ellie lay. "That's a Piper!" she identified correctly, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "The engine sounds different, lower pitch." For the next 2 hours, private aircraft continued to arrive at regular intervals. Cessnas, Pipers, Beechcraft, even a few small business jets. Each pilot had volunteered their time and fuel to provide comfort to a child they had never met, but whose story had touched them deeply. As the aircraft continued to pass overhead, something remarkable happened. Ellie's breathing became more regular. The tension left her small body. Her pain medication seemed more effective as she relaxed into the familiar, comforting sound of aircraft engines. "She's falling asleep," Sarah whispered incredulously to Michael, "actually sleeping peacefully." Dr. Chen, who had been monitoring Ellie's vital signs, nodded in confirmation. "Her cortisol levels are dropping, heart rate stabilizing. This is working better than I anticipated." Around 9 o'clock, a larger aircraft approached, a regional jet, deliberately flying lower than its usual approach altitude, though still within safety parameters. As its more powerful engines created a deeper rumble overhead, Ellie smiled in her sleep. "That's Northern Airways Flight 879, Michael identified. "Doug's flight. He's landing now, then he'll join us here." By the time Doug arrived at the hospital, in full captain's uniform, Ellie was experiencing her first extended period of peaceful sleep in weeks. The private aircraft continued their carefully coordinated flyovers, creating a consistent pattern of comforting sound. Doug surveyed the scene with evident emotion. "I just got off the phone with our operations center. The official temporary flight path adjustment has been approved effective immediately, not tomorrow as originally planned." Commercial flights will begin using the adjusted approach pattern within the hour. How did you get it expedited? Michael asked in amazement. I didn't, Doug replied. The FAA did. Apparently the administrator's grandson is in remission from childhood cancer. When she heard about Ellie, she personally pushed through the final authorization. As midnight approached, Ellie remained asleep, the longest period of uninterrupted rest she had experienced since entering hospice care. The medical team continued to monitor her closely, amazed at the visible reduction in her distress. We can maintain this setup as long as needed, Dr. Chen assured Sarah and David. Her condition is actually slightly improved with proper rest. This might buy her a little more quality time. Doug, who had been coordinating with ATC, approached with his tablet. Commercial flights are now officially following the adjusted flight path. We have coverage throughout the night and into tomorrow. Sarah, who hadn't left Ellie's side, looked up at the pilots with tear-filled eyes. I don't know how to thank you. This small thing, this sound most people consider a nuisance, it's giving her peace in her final days. No thanks necessary, Doug said gently. The aviation community takes care of its own. And from everything Michael has told me, Ellie is a pilot at heart. As the night deepened, Michael and Doug took turns coordinating with incoming flights, ensuring the pattern of aircraft noise remained consistent. Hospital staff rotated shifts, monitoring Ellie's condition while providing support to her parents. The most remarkable moment came shortly after 2 a.m., when Ellie briefly awoke between flyovers. She seemed more lucid than she had been in days, the combination of pain medication and proper rest temporarily lifting the fog of her illness. Captain Michael, she called softly. Michael, who had been conferring with Doug nearby, immediately came to her side. I'm here, Ellie. Thank you for the airplanes, she said, her voice clearer than it had been in weeks. I knew they were real ones. I can tell the difference. Those are real pilots up there, Michael told her. They all wanted to help you sleep. How many? Michael exchanged glances with Doug. Hundreds tonight, and thousands more have volunteered for the coming days. Ellie considered this with evident wonder. All of them for me? All of them for you, Michael confirmed, because pilots take care of each other. But I'm not really a pilot, Ellie whispered. I never got to fly a plane. Doug stepped forward then, removing his pilot's wings from his uniform. Ellie Morgan, he said formally, as Chief Pilot of Northern Airways, I am authorized to recognize exceptional contributions to aviation. Your knowledge, passion, and spirit qualify you as an honorary pilot in our ranks. He pinned the wings carefully to her pajama top. These wings are normally earned after years of training. You've earned them through courage and love of flight. Tears slid down Ellie's pale cheeks as she touched the wings with trembling fingers. Real pilot's wings? Real wings for a real pilot, Doug confirmed. It's official. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? Ellie drifted back to sleep with her hand still touching the wings on her pajamas, a small smile on her face. Above, aircraft continued their procession across the night sky, each one bringing its gift of comfort to the small figure on the hospital rooftop. By dawn, word had spread throughout the aviation community about the impromptu ceremony. Pilots from airlines around the world began sending their wings to the hospital. American, British, Japanese, Australian aviators, all contributing their symbols of achievement to honor Ellie. As morning broke, Dr. Chen conducted a thorough evaluation of Ellie's condition. Her vital signs have stabilized significantly, he reported to Sarah and David. The uninterrupted rest has allowed her body to recover some strength. I can't make promises about how much time this might add, but her immediate suffering has been considerably reduced. Can we continue this arrangement? David asked, gesturing to the helipad setup. As long as the weather cooperates, yes, Dr. Chen confirmed. We'll need contingency plans for rain or extreme temperatures, but for now, this is clearly providing exceptional palliative benefit. Throughout that day, commercial flights continued following the adjusted approach path, providing regular aircraft sounds that kept Ellie sleeping peacefully most of the time. When she was awake, she was noticeably more comfortable, more present, more herself than she had been in weeks. The collection of pilots' wings grew as deliveries arrived from airports across the country. Airline crews on layovers came to visit, each bringing their wings or other aviation memorabilia. The local news picked up the story, broadcasting images of aircraft deliberately adjusting their flight paths to comfort a dying child. By evening, Ellie's hospital room had been transformed into a virtual aviation museum, with model aircraft, wings, and flight insignia covering every surface. The outpouring of support from the aviation community had exceeded anything Michael or Doug could have imagined. Around sunset, as Michael prepared to return to Chicago for his next assigned flight, Sarah asked to speak with him privately. "I need you to know what this has meant," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Not just the sleep, though that's miraculous enough, but the belonging you've given her. All her life, Ellie has loved something most 8-year-old girls never think about. She's felt different, special, but isolated in her passion. Now she knows she's part of something bigger." Michael nodded in understanding. "The pilot community is like that. Once you're in, you're family. Ellie's always been one of us. We just made it official." "The doctors are still clear that she doesn't have much time," Sarah continued, her composure faltering slightly. "But these days you've given us, with her comfortable, lucid, more herself, they're precious beyond words." "The flight path adjustment is authorized for 72 hours, Michael reminded her. "But Doug is already working on an extension. As long as Ellie needs us, we'll be overhead." When Michael returned to Chicago the next day, he found the pilot's lounge buzzing with discussion about Ellie's flight path, as it had become known throughout the industry. Pilots were adjusting their schedules to ensure they could fly the Minneapolis route. Aviation enthusiasts with private aircraft were coordinating to fill any potential gaps in the flight pattern. "It's becoming a movement," Layla told him when they met for their pre-flight briefing. "Not just for Ellie anymore, but for all children in palliative care. Pilots in other cities are exploring similar arrangements with their local hospitals." 2 days later, when Michael returned to Minneapolis, he found Ellie still on the rooftop helipad, but with a significant change. 5 other children from the palliative care unit had joined her, their beds arranged in a semicircle, all benefiting from the consistent passage of aircraft overhead. "We've observed improved sleep in all our terminal patients since implementing this approach," Dr. Chen explained. "Something about the rhythmic, predictable nature of the sound seems to provide comfort even to children who weren't previously aviation enthusiasts." The FAA had extended the temporary flight path adjustment for an additional week, with discussions underway about a permanent modification that would bring more regular air traffic within audible range of the hospital without compromising safety or noise abatement regulations. Ellie herself was experiencing what Dr. Chen carefully termed a palliative rally, a temporary improvement sometimes seen in terminal patients when their symptoms are well managed and their psychological state improves. She was more alert, required less pain medication, and was able to engage more fully with her parents and visitors. "It's not a reversal of her condition," Dr. Chen cautioned. "The underlying disease continues to progress, but her quality of life in this final stage has improved dramatically." The pile of pilots' wings continued to grow, eventually numbering over 4,000, representing pilots from 6 continents and virtually every commercial airline and military branch. Each came with a note, a story, a message for the young aviation enthusiast who had united the global flying community in a mission of comfort. Chapter 1, Character Count, 34,987. Chapter 2, Horizons Beyond. 1 week after the first private aircraft had passed over Memorial Children's Hospital, Michael arrived for his regular visit to find a changed atmosphere on the rooftop. Additional shelters had been constructed, creating a more permanent arrangement for the palliative care patients who had all shown improvement under the aviation therapy program, as the hospital was now calling it. Ellie's space had been personalized with aviation-themed decorations, model aircraft hanging from the ceiling, a wall of the pilot's wings she had received, and a specialized tablet that tracked each flight passing overhead, identifying the aircraft type, airline, and route. "Captain Michael," she called when she saw him, her voice stronger than he had heard it since their first meeting. "Did you see the C-17 that passed by this morning? It was a military transport. They radioed the tower specially to tell me they were coming." Michael smiled, heartened by her enthusiasm, but still acutely aware of the medical equipment surrounding her. The IV lines delivering pain medication, the monitors tracking her failing organs. The flight path adjustment had improved her comfort immeasurably, but the underlying reality remained unchanged. "I heard about that," he confirmed, taking a seat beside her bed. "The Air Force wanted to join our mission." Ellie showed him her logbook, not his gifted one, but a new one she had started, recording every aircraft that passed overhead, noting their type, time, and any special characteristics. It was meticulously maintained, with surprisingly accurate technical observations. "You're keeping better records than some professional pilots I know," Michael told her, genuinely impressed. "Mom helps when I'm sleeping," Ellie admitted, "but I've logged over 300 flights myself. Dr. Chen says I'm the world's first atmospheric aviation observer specialist." Sarah, who had been speaking with one of the nurses nearby, joined them with a tired but genuine smile. She created the job title herself, insisted on business cards. The transformation in Ellie over the past week had been remarkable. While still critically ill, she had emerged from the fog of constant pain and exhaustion into periods of lucidity and engagement that had seemed impossible before. The continuous, predictable pattern of aircraft overhead had not only helped her sleep, but had given her a purpose. Tracking, identifying, and recording each flight became her mission. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you both," Michael said, addressing Sarah as David joined them. "Northern Airways is organizing something special for Ellie, but we wanted to get your permission first." "Another surprise?" David asked. "You've all done so much already." "This is different," Michael explained. "Tomorrow is International Civil Aviation Day. Pilots around the world celebrate the spirit of flight and the connection it creates between people and nations. Northern Airways would like to dedicate the day to Ellie, with special call signs for all our flights passing over the hospital." "What does that mean exactly?" Sarah asked. "Instead of being identified as Northern 537 or whatever the flight number is, each aircraft would use the call sign Ellie's Wings, followed by a number. It would be announced on all aviation frequencies, recognized by air traffic control, and officially recorded in flight logs worldwide." Ellie's eyes widened. "Real planes using my name as their actual call sign, the one they say on the radio?" "Every Northern Airways flight passing Minneapolis tomorrow," Michael confirmed. "And we've had interest from other airlines about joining the tribute. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments." The next morning, International Civil Aviation Day dawned clear and cold in Minneapolis. On the hospital rooftop, now equipped with improved heating systems and weather protection, Ellie was dressed in a custom-made pilot's uniform that had been delivered the previous evening. A perfect replica of a Northern Airways captain's uniform, complete with 4 stripes on the sleeves and her name embroidered above the pocket. A special aviation radio had been set up beside her bed, tuned to the approach frequency for Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Through it, she could hear the communications between air traffic controllers and incoming aircraft, a technical detail that delighted her aviation-oriented mind. At precisely 8 a.m., the first dedicated flight approached. "Minneapolis approach, good morning, Ellie's Wings 1, with you descending through 12,000 for 10,000, information Delta," came the pilot's voice over the radio. "Ellie's Wings 1, Minneapolis approach, good morning," the controller responded. "Descend and maintain 7,000, expect runway 30R, special approach path authorized." Ellie's face glowed with excitement as she listened to the exchange. "That's Captain Doug," she exclaimed, recognizing his voice from his visits. "He's flying the first one!" Within minutes, the aircraft appeared in the distance, a Boeing 737 deliberately positioned to pass directly over the hospital. As it approached, something unexpected happened. The plane waggled its wings, a pilot's salute rarely seen in commercial aviation. "Minneapolis, Ellie's Wings 1. Doug's voice came through the radio again. "Please convey to our honorary captain on the rooftop that the wing salute is specially authorized for today's operations. Ellie's Wings 1, message will be conveyed. You're cleared for the Ellie 1 approach. Contact tower at Morgan intersection." Even the approach procedure and navigation waypoints had been temporarily renamed for the occasion, a level of coordination between the airline, the FAA, and air traffic control that was unprecedented for a non-emergency situation. As Doug's flight passed overhead, Ellie raised her small hand in salute, her captain's uniform making the gesture seem oddly official, despite her young age and fragile condition. Throughout the day, the pattern continued. Every Northern Airways flight approaching Minneapolis used the special call sign, each acknowledged by air traffic control and recorded in official flight logs. Other airlines joined in, with pilots requesting permission to use the special approach path and sending their regards to Captain Ellie as they passed. By midday, the story had been picked up by national news networks. Aviation enthusiasts tracked the unusual call signs and approach patterns, spreading the word through social media. Thousands of pilots not even flying near Minneapolis changed their personal radio signatures to include "For Ellie" in solidarity. The hospital rooftop became a gathering place as other children from the pediatric wards were brought up to witness the aviation tribute. Those well enough to leave their rooms, watching in wonder as aircraft deliberately adjusted their flight paths to honor one of their peers. Around 2 o'clock, a special visitor arrived on the rooftop, FAA Administrator Catherine Chen, who had personally expedited the flight path adjustment authorization. She presented Ellie with an official FAA certificate recognizing her extraordinary contribution to aviation community spirit and naming the temporary approach procedure permanently as the Ellie 1 approach. "This will appear on official aeronautical charts," Administrator Chen explained to Ellie's astonished parents. "Long after today, pilots will fly the Ellie 1 approach into Minneapolis, and her story will be part of aviation history." If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? As the day progressed, Ellie's energy began to fade. The excitement, while joyful, had taxed her limited reserves. Dr. Chen adjusted her medication, ensuring her comfort while allowing her to remain aware of the ongoing tribute overhead. "I need to rest a little," Ellie admitted reluctantly as afternoon turned to evening, "but I don't want to miss any of the planes." "I'll log them for you," Sarah promised, taking the logbook from Ellie's lap. "Every single one, with all the details. You can review my work when you wake up." Ellie smiled weakly, her eyelids growing heavy. "Make sure you note the engine types too. They sound different." And bam, as she drifted into sleep, the aircraft continued their procession overhead, their engines creating the soothing lullaby that had become her greatest comfort. The aviation radio beside her bed continued to announce Ellie's Wings flights, the voices of pilots from around the world contributing to her peaceful rest. Michael, who had been coordinating with Northern Airways Operations Center throughout the day, stepped away to take a call from Doug. "How's our honorary captain holding up?" Doug asked. "Resting now," Michael replied. "The excitement was a lot for her, but she's logging flights even in her sleep. Her mom's keeping the records current." "Good, because we've got something special coming." Northern Airways CEO authorized a dedicated charter, call sign Ellie's Wing 0, ETA 90 minutes. "A charter? For what purpose?" "You'll see," Doug said cryptically. "Just make sure she's awake for it." When Michael returned to Ellie's bedside, he found Dr. Chen conducting a thorough assessment while Sarah and David watched anxiously. Her respiratory function is declining more rapidly than expected, Dr. Chen was explaining quietly. And her liver values indicate accelerated progression of the disease. I believe we're entering the final phase. Sarah covered her mouth, stifling a sob. How long? Dr. Chen's expression was compassionate but direct. Hours, possibly. A day at most. I'm adjusting her medication to ensure she remains comfortable, but we should prepare for transition to end-of-life protocols. Michael felt as though he'd been struck. Despite knowing Ellie's condition was terminal, the improvement in her quality of life over the past week had created an illusion of stability. The reality of her imminent death hit him with unexpected force. "There's a special flight coming," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Northern Airways has arranged something. It's due in about an hour." Dr. Chen considered this information. "She's sleeping now, but I can adjust her medication timing to ensure she's alert when this special flight arrives. Given the circumstances, I believe continuing to provide these meaningful experiences takes priority as long as her comfort is maintained." The next hour passed slowly. Ellie slept peacefully as aircraft continued to pass overhead, each pilot unaware that the child they were honoring was beginning her final journey. Sarah maintained the logbook meticulously, recording details with trembling hands, determined that Ellie's records would be complete. As sunset approached, casting the hospital rooftop in golden light, Dr. Chen gently roused Ellie. "There's a special flight coming for you," he explained as she blinked awake. "Captain Michael says it's important." Ellie's awareness returned slowly, her eyes less focused than before, her breathing more labored, but the mention of a special flight brought a spark of interest. "What kind of plane?" she asked. "Let's wait and see," Michael suggested, pulling his chair closer. "It should be here in about 15 minutes. Right on schedule, the aviation radio crackled with a new transmission. "Minneapolis approach. Good evening, Ellie's Wing 0. Requesting priority handling for the Ellie 1 approach. We are a Northern Airways Special Operations flight. Ellie's Wing 0, Minneapolis approach. You are cleared as requested. Be advised your special passenger is awaiting your arrival." Ellie frowned slightly in confusion. Special passenger. Minutes later, the aircraft appeared. Not a standard Northern Airways Boeing, but a smaller executive jet painted in the airline's colors. It followed the now familiar path directly over the hospital, engines singing a perfect lullaby as it passed. But instead of continuing to the airport, the aircraft circled back, making a second pass over the hospital before proceeding to landing. "That's unusual," Michael noted. "They don't normally do a second pass." As the sound of the jet faded, David's phone rang. He answered, listened briefly, then looked up in surprise. "There's someone here to see Ellie. Hospital security is escorting them up now. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you're listening to in the comments." 10 minutes later, the rooftop door opened to reveal an unexpected visitor. Captain Amelia Rodriguez, the most famous female pilot in Northern Airways history and Ellie's personal hero. The pioneering aviator, now in her 70s but still commanding respect in her uniform, walked directly to Ellie's bedside. "Captain Ellie Morgan, I presume," she said formally, offering a crisp salute. Ellie stared in disbelief, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Captain Rodriguez? The real Captain Rodriguez? Mom, it's her. From the book." Sarah nodded, equally astonished. "We've read your biography at least 20 times, she explained to the visitor. Captain Rodriguez smiled warmly. "So I've been told. That's why I requested to fly today's special charter." She turned back to Ellie. "I understand you've been monitoring flight operations with exceptional attention to detail." "I have a logbook," Ellie confirmed, indicating the notebook beside her. "I've recorded every flight." "Excellent record-keeping is the mark of a true aviator," Captain Rodriguez approved. "I have something for you, captain to captain." She produced a small box, opening it to reveal pilot's wings, unlike the others Ellie had received. Gold rather than silver, with a diamond in the center. "These are my original wings from my first captain assignment in 1975, Captain Rodriguez explained. Only 6 women in the world had earned them at that time. I've kept them for 47 years, waiting for the right person to pass them to. Me," Ellie whispered, her voice faint with disbelief. "But I haven't earned them." Haven't you?" Captain Rodriguez questioned gently. "You've shown courage in the face of impossible odds. You've maintained precise technical knowledge despite challenging circumstances. You've inspired thousands of aviation professionals to adjust their operations for the benefit of others. Those are the qualities of a true captain, regardless of whether you've ever left the ground." She pinned the wings carefully alongside the others on Ellie's uniform. "Moreover, you've changed aviation permanently. The LE-1 approach will remain on charts long after today. Pilots will fly it for generations, and they'll know your story." Tears filled Ellie's eyes. "I never got to fly a real plane." "Ah, but that's why I'm here," Captain Rodriguez replied. "Northern Airways CEO authorized something unprecedented. We've brought a flight simulator onto the aircraft, the same one we use to train pilots. It's been calibrated for Minneapolis approaches, including the LE-1. If Dr. Chen approves, we'd like to give you the opportunity to fly it, virtually but using the actual systems." Dr. Chen, who had been monitoring Ellie's condition throughout the conversation, considered the request. Under normal circumstances, moving a terminally ill patient in Ellie's condition would be out of the question. But these circumstances were far from normal. "We would need to maintain her medication delivery and monitoring," he said thoughtfully, "and the timeline would need to be very limited, 30 minutes at most." "We've coordinated with emergency medical services," Captain Rodriguez assured him. "The aircraft is parked at a private terminal with direct tarmac access. Ground transportation is standing by. The simulator is already programmed and ready." David looked to Sarah, both parents caught between hope and fear, wanting to give their daughter this final gift, while terrified of any change that might cause her additional suffering. "What do you think, Ellie?" Sarah asked finally. "It's completely your choice." Ellie's face reflected the internal struggle, the fatigue and pain warring with the desire to experience, even virtually, the things she had dreamed of her entire life. "I want to fly," she said finally, "just once. A real simulator like actual pilots use." The next 30 minutes were a carefully choreographed medical operation. Ellie was transferred to a transport gurney, her medication systems and monitoring equipment accompanying her. Hospital staff, paramedics, and Northern Airways ground personnel coordinated seamlessly to move her from the rooftop to a waiting ambulance, then directly onto the tarmac where the executive jet waited. Inside, the aircraft had been transformed. The standard seating had been replaced with a medical support area, and at the front a simplified version of the airline's full-motion simulator, essentially the cockpit section with functional controls and a wraparound visual system. Captain Rodriguez took the right seat, the instructor's position, while Ellie was carefully settled into the modified left seat, her medical support systems positioned to allow her access to the essential controls. "This is a Boeing 737 simulator," Captain Rodriguez explained. "The same aircraft that has been flying over your hospital. We've simplified some systems, but maintained the core flight experience. The visuals are showing Minneapolis at sunset, positioned for the LE-1 approach. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep?" Ellie's hands trembled as she reached for the control yoke, not just from illness, but from the overwhelming emotion of finally touching the controls of what felt like a real aircraft. The wraparound screens showed a stunningly realistic view of Minneapolis from 5,000 feet, the hospital clearly visible on their approach path. "Ready, Captain Morgan?" Captain Rodriguez asked formally. Ellie nodded, her face set in determination despite her evident exhaustion. "Ready, Captain Rodriguez." "Your aircraft," Rodriguez said, using the traditional pilot's handover phrase. "My aircraft," Ellie confirmed, her small hands wrapping around the yoke. For the next 20 minutes, Ellie Morgan flew. The simulator had been programmed with assistance features that compensated for her limited strength while still providing authentic feedback. Captain Rodriguez guided her through each step of the approach, using standard pilot terminology that Ellie remarkably understood from her extensive reading. Descending through 4,000, maintaining heading 270, hospital in sight, Ellie reported using proper radio phraseology. Cleared for the visual approach, Ellie's wings 0, Rodriguez responded, playing the role of air traffic control. As the simulated aircraft descended along the LE-1 approach path, the hospital growing larger in their virtual windscreen, something extraordinary happened in the real world outside. Northern Airways had coordinated with air traffic control to temporarily clear a path for actual arriving flights to hold, while Ellie completed her virtual approach. Minneapolis approach. All inbound traffic is holding for Ellie's wings 0, came the actual transmission over the radio that had been installed in the simulator. Captain Morgan has priority clearance. The real air traffic controllers, the real pilots in holding patterns around Minneapolis, all paused their normal operations to allow one dying child to complete her virtual flight uninterrupted. In the simulator, Ellie guided the aircraft perfectly along the approach path she had watched so many times from below. Her technical knowledge, combined with her innate feel for flight, produced a smooth descent that would have impressed any flight instructor. 1,000 feet, Captain Rodriguez called out, following standard approach procedures. Runway in sight, cleared to land. Runway in sight, cleared to land, Ellie repeated, her voice growing fainter as her energy waned, but her concentration never breaking. The simulator's visual system showed the runway approaching, the perspective shifting exactly as it would in an actual landing. Ellie made small, precise corrections to maintain centerline, demonstrating an instinctive understanding of flight dynamics that most student pilots take months to develop. 500 feet, Rodriguez continued. Looking good, Captain. Ellie adjusted the aircraft's sink rate, compensating for a simulated crosswind with textbook precision. Her breathing had become more labored, but her focus remained absolute. 300 feet. Begin flare preparation. Beginning flare, Ellie acknowledged, her voice barely above a whisper now. Sarah and David watched from behind, tears streaming unchecked down their faces. The medical team monitored Ellie's declining vital signs with professional detachment, but even they were visibly moved by the scene unfolding before them. 100 feet. Start your flare, Captain. Ellie gently pulled back on the yoke, adjusting the aircraft's attitude for landing. The simulator responded, the visual display showing the runway threshold passing beneath them, the perspective shifting as the virtual aircraft settled toward the concrete. 50 feet. 40. 30. Ellie completed the landing flare perfectly, reducing power as the simulated aircraft settled onto the runway with a gentle bump. Touchdown, Captain Rodriguez announced. Excellent landing, Captain Morgan. Truly professional. The simulator's visual system showed the aircraft rolling out on the runway, the terminal buildings of Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport visible ahead. In reality, Ellie's hands had fallen away from the controls, her strength finally exhausted. But her eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching as her virtual flight completed its journey. And on her face was an expression of pure peace, the look of someone who had, against all odds, achieved their heart's desire. Ellie's wings 0. Welcome to Minneapolis, came the actual voice of the Minneapolis tower controller over the radio, abandoning standard phraseology in recognition of the moment's significance. Captain Morgan, the aviation community salutes you. As if on cue, the radio came alive with a cascade of transmissions, brief, solemn, and deeply moving. American 1547 salutes Captain Morgan. Delta 882 salutes Captain Morgan. United 449 salutes Captain Morgan. FedEx 903 salutes Captain Morgan. One by one, every aircraft holding around Minneapolis added their tribute, creating an unprecedented chorus of respect from the worldwide aviation community for the young pilot who had brought them together in an extraordinary mission of compassion. Ellie turned slightly toward her parents, her breathing now shallow and irregular, but a smile of transcendent joy illuminating her pale features. "I flew, Mom," she whispered. "I really flew." "Yes, you did, sweetheart," Sarah confirmed, moving to embrace her daughter as the medical team stepped forward, their expressions conveying what words did not need to say. Captain Rodriguez quietly vacated the instructor's seat, allowing Sarah and David to surround Ellie as Dr. Chen administered additional medication to ensure her comfort. Northern 537, cleared for the Ellie-1 approach, runway 30R, came one final transmission over the radio. "Godspeed, Captain Morgan." Outside, in the darkening sky over Minneapolis, commercial flights resumed their adjusted flight path, passing over the hospital where Ellie's story had begun. But now, one small executive jet on the tarmac below had become the focus of an unprecedented moment in aviation history, where pilots around the world had paused to honor one of their own. In the modified cockpit, surrounded by her parents, her doctor, and her aviation hero, Ellie Morgan closed her eyes for the final time. Not in the hospital bed where she had suffered, but in the captain's seat where she belonged, with real pilot's wings on her chest and the memory of flight, however brief, fulfilled at last. "She's at peace," Dr. Chen confirmed quietly moments later. "No more pain." Sarah cradled her daughter beyond words in her grief, yet somehow comforted by the knowledge that Ellie's final moments had been filled with joy rather than suffering, achievement rather than loss. Captain Rodriguez, who had seen many of aviation's defining moments in her long career, placed her hand gently on David's shoulder. "In our profession," she said softly, "we have a saying, pilots don't die, they just fly higher. Today, your daughter joined our ranks in the truest sense." If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you're listening to in the comments. The news of Ellie Morgan's passing spread through the aviation community with extraordinary speed. Air traffic controllers in Minneapolis made an unprecedented announcement on all frequencies, asking for a moment of radio silence in her honor. Pilots worldwide, many of whom had adjusted their flight plans to support her comfort in recent days, observed the request regardless of their location. For 60 seconds, the normally constant chatter of aviation radio traffic fell silent. From the busiest international hubs to remote regional airports, no transmissions were made, no clearances given, no positions reported. The world's airways, for one brief moment, paused in tribute. When radio communications resumed, Northern Airways Flight 703, Doug's return flight to Chicago, requested and received special permission to perform a missing man formation departure, a traditional aviation tribute normally reserved for military ceremonies. With coordination from air traffic control, the aircraft climbed normally after takeoff, then executed a sudden vertical maneuver, separating from its expected flight path to symbolize a departed aviator. At Memorial Children's Hospital, something remarkable was happening. The other children in the palliative care program who had benefited from Ellie's flight path were asking questions, seeking to understand the story of the girl whose love of aviation had brought comfort to their final days. "Will the airplanes stop coming now?" asked 6-year-old Thomas, who had been moved to the rooftop 3 days earlier. "No," Dr. Chen assured him. "Captain Morgan's flight path is permanent now. The planes will continue their approach over the hospital. Her legacy will help other children sleep peacefully for years to come." In the days that followed, the impact of Ellie's story continued to expand. The Aviation Medical Association published a preliminary study documenting the Morgan Protocol, the use of authentic aircraft noise as a palliative care intervention for pediatric patients. Hospitals near major airports around the world began exploring similar programs, working with local aviation authorities to develop designated flight paths for compassionate purposes. Northern Airways announced the creation of the Captain Ellie Morgan Memorial Scholarship, providing flight training for chronically ill children who dreamed of aviation careers. The specialized simulator that had enabled Ellie's final flight was permanently dedicated to the program, traveling to children's hospitals throughout the country to provide virtual flight experiences for those unable to access cockpits conventionally. 1 week after Ellie's passing, a memorial service was held, not in a traditional funeral home, but in Hangar 7 at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. The massive space had been transformed, with Ellie's captain's uniform and logbook displayed prominently alongside the thousands of pilot's wings she had received. The attendees included not just family and friends, but hundreds of pilots in uniform, aviation professionals from around the world, and families of other children in palliative care. Captain Rodriguez delivered a eulogy that focused not on loss, but on achievement. In her 8 years, Ellie Morgan flew higher than many who spent decades in cockpits, she told the assembled mourners. She reminded an entire industry of its humanity, its capacity for compassion, its ability to adjust course when something truly matters. As the service concluded, attendees moved outside to witness a final tribute. With FAA approval, 50 aircraft, from small Cessnas to commercial jets, conducted a precisely choreographed flyover of the airport, forming a perfect E pattern in the sky. Among those watching was Michael Reeves, standing alongside Doug Wright, both in full captain's uniform. They'd been central to initiating what had become known as Operation Lullaby, but they were now just two among thousands who had been touched by Ellie's story. 4,000 pilots stood by for one child, Doug remarked quietly. I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of flying. And now it continues, Michael replied. The LE-1 approach is being used for children's hospitals in Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas. The FAA is developing standardized procedures for what they're calling compassionate routing initiatives. Not bad for a chance encounter in a hospital cafeteria, Doug observed. Michael thought back to that moment, overhearing nurses discussing a child who couldn't sleep, making a spontaneous decision to visit a stranger's hospital room. How easily it might not have happened. How many such moments occurred every day, unnoticed forks in the road where small choices led to profound consequences. You know what keeps hitting me, Michael said. All Ellie wanted was to hear airplanes so she could sleep. Such a simple thing. Something most people would consider a nuisance. Sometimes the things that bring the greatest comfort are the ones most people never notice, Doug replied. That's what made her a natural pilot. She paid attention to details others missed. 6 months later, Michael was operating a flight from Dallas to Minneapolis when he received a notification from air traffic control. Northern 622, expect the LE-1 approach, runway 30R. As he acknowledged the instruction, the controller added an unusual comment. Captain, be advised we have 5 children on the rooftop today. Your flight is their evening lullaby. Michael felt a familiar tightening in his throat as he adjusted his course to follow the now permanent approach path that would bring his aircraft directly over Memorial Children's Hospital. The Compassionate Flight Path program had been officially adopted by the FAA, with similar initiatives implemented at 27 hospitals nationwide. Northern 622, Minneapolis approach, the controller continued. Memorial Hospital requests a wing waggle if operationally feasible. Northern 622, wing waggle approved, Michael confirmed. When they reached the designated point in the approach, Michael gently rocked the aircraft's wings from side to side, the aviation salute that had become a standard feature of the LE-1 approach. Below, on the hospital rooftop, children in palliative care would be watching, finding comfort in the predictable passage of aircraft overhead. In the cockpit beside him, his first officer, a young woman who had received her commercial license through the Captain Ellie Morgan Memorial Scholarship, smiled as she monitored the instruments. Perfect waggle, Captain, she commented. 5-star lullaby rating. High praise, Michael replied, especially from someone with your expertise in the field. As their aircraft continued its descent toward the runway, following the path that one child's need had permanently altered, Michael reflected on how a simple act, adjusting course to bring comfort to others, had transformed not just Ellie's final days, but the very nature of how aviation and medicine could work together. 4,000 pilots had stood by after a child in palliative care couldn't sleep. But their legacy continued in every flight that now passed over hospitals around the world, creating lullabies for children who needed them most, and proving that even in our most technologically complex systems, simple human compassion could still alter flight paths in ways that mattered deeply. In the control tower at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, a small plaque had been installed beside the radar screen, visible to every controller who managed the complex dance of arriving and departing aircraft. Its message was simple but profound, a reminder of aviation's highest purpose, the Ellie One approach, because sometimes the most important destination isn't on any chart.